Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're skipping the formalities today and jumping straight into the analysis. We've got 7 articles lined up for you covering geopolitics, tech, history, science, law, and more. Let's start with the editorial section. The first piece is by a former Indian ambassador to the UN, and it dives right into India's place in a rapidly changing world.
That's right. The core idea is that global geopolitics is hitting a kind of reset button. And while India needs to step up, needs to punch its weight, as the article puts it, things aren't necessarily going India's way at the moment.
Okay, so a bit of a challenging picture. The article uses this recent security incident, Operation Sindoor, as a sort of reality check. What exactly happened there?
Well, during that operation, the striking thing was how many of India's strategic partners were reluctant. They didn't want to publicly call out Pakistan for, harboring UN-sanctioned terrorist groups.
Even after the Pahalgam attack.
Exactly. Even after the attackers were identified as Pakistani Lashkar-e-Taiba members. And then you had former President Trump claiming he brokered a ceasefire using trade, which the Indian government flatly denied.
Right, I remember that. It seemed to complicate things.
It did. And adding, what the article calls an unkind twist, Pakistan's Field Marshal Munir was invited to lunch with Mr. Trump soon after. It just highlighted the, let's say, unpredictable nature of these relationships.
Any positive takeaways from that specific incident, though?
There were some. The U.S. did designate the Resistance Front, TRF, which claimed the Pahalgam attack as a foreign terrorist organization, and the UN Security Council's monitoring team also named TRF for that attack. So some accountability there.
Okay. The article that talks about these Trump-created hurdles, can you unpack that a bit? It sounds like more than just unpredictable diplomacy.
Yeah, it points to specific things, like a 25% tariff hitting India literally on the same day the NISAR satellite was launched. That was a major India-U.S. collaboration,
Wow, the timing.
Exactly. And it wasn't just that. Threats to substantially raise tariffs if India imported Russian oil, which is interesting because Trump himself was often seen as pushing for better U.S.-Russia ties.
Right, a bit contradictory.
And then calls for U.S. companies not to invest in India, just in the U.S., hire only Americans. It's all very America first, as the article frames it.
So is this part of a bigger pattern the article sees with the U.S.?
It argues it is. It mentions lopsided security and trade deals. For example, NVIDIA being allowed to resume selling certain AI chips, the H20 chips, to China, despite earlier security concerns. And also the U.S. being, bogged down in Ukraine and West Asia means less focus on East Asia. If the U.S. and China reach some broader understanding, that could really squeeze India's strategic options.
And the U.S.-Pakistan relationship.
That's becoming an irritant again, according to the piece. The U.S. praising Pakistan for counterterrorism efforts, which the article sees as insensitive to India's concerns. Plus, U.S. actions in places like Bangladesh and Myanmar are seen as destabilizing India's northeast, eroding trust.
Okay, so challenges from the U.S. side. What about the EU?
Similar pressures there, too. The EU sanctioned India's Vadanar refinery, knowing it would likely push up oil prices.
Even while some EU members get exemptions for Russian oil.
Exactly. Hungary, Slovakia, Belgium, Spain, they're still importing with waivers. And then you have the EU's carbon border tax, digital barriers, trade hurdles. It adds up.
It really sounds like India's caught in a complex web. In China's role.
China's making moves in the neighborhood, proposing new groupings, like a trilateral with Pakistan and Bangladesh, though Bangladesh hasn't agreed, it's worth noting.
And infrastructure.
Yes, helping Bangladesh revive an old World War II airbase near the Siliguri corridor, which is strategically sensitive for India.
Right.
Plus, China gave Pakistan significant support during Operation Sindoor. They're standardizing Mandarin names for places in Arunachal Pradesh. They want to influence the future of the Dalai Lama.
And economically.
Squeezing supply chains, rare earths, fertilizers, pharma ingredients. And the big one, potentially, is the plan for this massive dam in Tibet on the Yarlung-Zangbo River near India.
So, pulling this all together, what's the main takeaway from this article?
The article argues India's performing a tightrope act, trying to balance an unpredictable U.S., an unresponsive EU, and an aggressive China. It suggests India's realizing it can't just stay on the sidelines anymore.
Like the shift on the Gaza conflict,
Yep.
calling for a ceasefire after previously abstaining.
Exactly. That's presented as an example of India needing to be more assertive to protect its own strategic autonomy. The bottom line, according to the author, is pretty clear. For India's economy and tech future to succeed, it absolutely needs to get its geopolitics right. It's about proactive engagement, not just reacting.
Okay, a very complex geopolitical picture painted there. Let's shift focus now, still in the editorial section, to a major domestic issue, India's welfare system and its increasing reliance on technology. This second article talks about a move towards a technocratic calculus. It cites huge numbers, 1 billion Aadhaar IDs, over 1,200 schemes on the direct benefit transfer system. It asks a crucial question for you, the listener. What's the promise here, and what's the potential cost?
Well, the promise is pretty clear, right? Delivering welfare efficiently, at scale, cutting out the middlemen, the leaky pipelines, getting rid of ghost beneficiaries. It sounds great on paper.
But there's a but.
There is. The article expresses this concern that focusing purely on efficiency and coverage might sideline, democratic norms, political accountability.
How so?
It suggests politicians might be, perhaps rationally from their perspective, offloading hard choices onto data-driven algorithms, basically letting the tech decide difficult things instead of grappling with the constitutional values involved.
That's a really interesting point. It changes the fundamental questions being asked, doesn't it?
It does. The article argues the focus shifts from who deserves support and why, which is a political and ethical question, to how do we minimize leakage and maximize coverage, which is more of a technical efficiency question.
And this leads to the idea of a post-rights-based welfare regime.
Yes, where welfare stops being a space for democratic discussion. The rights-bearing citizen, the article suggests, gets replaced by the auditable beneficiary, someone who exists primarily as data in a system.
So beyond the big picture concerns, does the article offer concrete evidence of potential downsides?
It does point to some sobering observations, like social sector spending hitting a decade low, down to 17% in the 24-25 budget from an average of 21% over the previous decade.
A significant drop.
And funding for key schemes, minorities, labor, nutrition, Social Security fell sharply from 11% pre-COVID to just 3% post-COVID. That's a huge decline. Also, the right to information system is described as being an existential crisis. Over 400,000 pending cases, 8 vacant chief information commissioner posts. It makes holding the system accountable much harder.
And this ties into the idea of algorithmic insulation. What's that about?
The article uses the centralized public grievance system as an example. It centralizes visibility. You can see the complaints, but not necessarily responsibility. So figuring out who is actually accountable becomes increasingly elusive.
It reminds me of Justice Chandrachud's dissent on Aadhaar back in 2018.
Exactly. The article brings that up, his warning against reducing people to just disembedded machinic data, stripping away care, context, constitutional assurance. It's about losing the human element.
So what are the proposed solutions then? How do we avoid these pitfalls?
The article stresses the need for the state to really think about who is visible, who can complain, and whose suffering is computable. Because democracy, it argues, depends on suffering being visible and contestable, not merely computable.
Making suffering political again, not just technical data.
Precisely. It calls for democratic anti-fragility building systems that don't just collapse when things aren't perfect, when data isn't flawless. Building in resilience.
And practically, what steps does it suggest?
Empowering states to design solutions that fit their local context. Institutionalizing community-driven impact audits, something the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty also pushes for.
Like involving people on the ground more directly.
Yes, and building platform cooperatives, maybe learning from examples like Kerala's Kudumbashree, where self-help groups act as intermediaries. Incentivizing civil society, too.
And safeguards within the tech itself.
Crucially, yes. Strengthening offline fallback options, ensuring human feedback mechanisms, and embedding statutory bias audits. The right to explanation and appeal needs to be built in.
So the key insight here is
that for a truly developed India, a Viksit Bharat, citizens need to be partners in governance, not just entries in a ledger. The tech is powerful, but it needs to be humanized, democratized, and made accountable.
a powerful call for balance. Okay, let's shift gears now to the opinion section. This article takes us back 80 years to the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. August 6, 1945 in Hiroshima, at least 70,000 killed instantly. 3 days later, Nagasaki, 40,000 killed. Horrific numbers. But the article points out something striking. In the 80 years since, nuclear weapons haven't been used in anger again. It suggests a norm of non-use.
It's a profound observation, isn't it? But the article delves into how fragile that norm might be. It talks about the initial difficulty in even understanding radiation sickness, partly because the American occupation suppressed that information early on.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes, and it tells the story of the Fukuri Maru, the Japanese fishing boat caught in the fallout from the U.S. Castle Bravo test in 1954. That test was way more powerful than expected.
The Bikini Atoll test.
That's the one. And the exposure of that crew tragically revealed that these bombs kill slowly, painfully through radiation, not just instantly through blast. It was a turning point.
And this led to the Hibakusha movement, the survivors.
Exactly. The Hibakusha organized as the Nihon Hidenkyo. They started educating the world about what they went through, becoming powerful voices for disarmament. Their testimony was, well, absolutely crucial.
So the article asks this key question. Is this 80-year non-use norm down to their moral argument, the horror they conveyed? Or is it more about the cold logic of nuclear deterrence, mutually assured destruction and all that?
It explores that tension. And it notes that while the total number of nukes is down from the Cold War peak, today's weapons are often more sophisticated. There's talk of more usable tactical nukes, which, blurs the line.
That's worrying. Does this norm actually have any legal basis?
That's a key point the article makes. There's no legal basis strictly prohibiting their use. Treaties like the NPT limit spread, the CTBT bans tests, but neither actually forbids use.
This is more of a shared understanding, a taboo.
Kind of. The NPT urges nuclear states to work towards disarmament in good faith. And the International Court of Justice in '96 gave an advisory opinion that using them would generally be contrary to humanitarian law. But it's not an outright ban in law. It's a norm, a very strong one, but still a norm.
And the recent events are straining this norm.
Immensely. Russia's nuclear rhetoric over Ukraine is the most obvious example cited. But the article also mentions something else, drawing from another source.
Relating to Operation Sindoor again.
Yes. Apparently, during that India-Pakistan incident, Prime Minister Modi stated India will not tolerate any nuclear black measure. It suggests that even a supposedly limited conventional conflict very quickly took on a nuclear dimension, at least rhetorically.
Showing how quickly things can escalate.
Precisely. And this renewed tension might be why the Hibakusha group, the Nihon Hidenkyo, finally received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2024, almost 70 years after they were first nominated.
A long overdue recognition, coinciding with renewed fears.
It seems so. The nuclear genie, as the article puts it, is out of the bottle again in Europe. The warning is clear. Don't get complacent. We shouldn't need another disaster like the Fukuri Maru, another misstep, to remember how dangerous these weapons are.
Sobering reminder. The key insight, then, is that this 80-year peace is fragile, built on memory and deterrence, not solid law, and it's under serious pressure right now. Okay, let's move from global existential threats to a threat within the scientific community itself. We're heading to the science section now. This article discusses a new study in a major journal, PNAS, and it sounds pretty alarming. It says systematic scientific fraud isn't just a few bad apples anymore, but a pervasive, organized, and rapidly growing threat. Is it really that bad?
According to this study, yes. It uses a game theory analogy. Science is like a public goods game. Everyone benefits if everyone contributes honestly, builds on trustworthy work.
Right. Trust is fundamental.
Exactly. But the study finds widespread, organized defection. Lots of players are basically cheating the system, not making genuine contributions. And crucially, it's not just individuals acting alone.
So, organize how?
It talks about paper mills, companies that churn out fake papers, brokerage firms, even compliant editors, and unscrupulous journals all working together. It's described as an organized activity, an industry almost.
An industry of fraud. How does that work? Can they trace it?
The study did some clever data analysis. They found specific editors, often at large publishers like PLOS1 or Hindawi, handled a huge, disproportionate number of papers that later got retracted or flagged on sites like PubPeer.
Less than 1% of editors handling a massive chunk of the problem papers.
Yes. And these editors often formed tightly knit clusters, publishing each other's flawed work. It points to coordination.
Can you give an example of these operations?
The article mentions an organization in India called ORRDA, the Academic Research and Development Association. They allegedly didn't just write and submit papers for clients, they actively journal hopped. When one journal they used got flagged or shut down, they just shift their business to others. Their list of guaranteed publication journals apparently grew from 14 to over 86 between 2018 and 2024.
Wow. And the quality.
Often terrible and way outside the journal's scope. The article gives this example. A paper about roasting hazelnuts appearing in a journal about aphids care. That strongly suggests authorship slots were just being sold off.
Hazelnuts in an AIDS journal.
Yeah.
That says it all. What are the overall numbers like? How fast is this growing?
This is the really scary part. The study estimates the number of suspected paper mill articles is doubling every 1.5 years. That's apparently 10 times faster than legitimate scientific publishing is growing.
10 times faster. Are the current checks and balances working at all?
Not nearly enough, it seems. Fewer than 100 journals get denexed each year, but there are potentially tens of thousands of these suspect papers out there. The study estimates only about 25% of them will ever be retracted.
So 75% of this potentially fraudulent science stays in the system.
That's the implication, which is why the study sounds such an urgent alarm. Without much better coordinated, independent ways to detect and punish this misconduct, the integrity of science itself is being undermined.
It's not just about wasted resources, it's about trust in science itself.
Exactly. The worry is that the future of science could be shaped by these networks, these essentially criminal organizations dealing in millions of dollars, where cheating becomes the rational path. It demands a serious systemic response.
A truly disturbing picture from the world of science publishing. Let's move now to the tech section, focusing first on law and finance specifically, money laundering in India. This article starts with a striking statistic from a finance minister's report. Since 2015, the Enforcement Directorate, the ED, has taken up nearly 5,900 cases under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, PMLA. But guess how many convictions?
Let me guess. Not many.
Only 15. 15 convictions out of almost 5,900 cases initiated. That huge gap really makes you question how effective the law is in practice.
It certainly raises questions. The article first defines money laundering under the Act, basically, any process connected to hiding, possessing, acquiring, or using the proceeds of crime and trying to make it look legitimate, like untainted property.
And it happens in stages, right?
Yes, typically 3. First is placement, getting the dirty money into the financial system, sometimes using smurfing, breaking large sums into smaller ones to avoid reporting thresholds.
Like lots of small deposits instead of one big one.
Exactly. Then comes layering, moving the money around through complex transactions, maybe offshore accounts, investments to hide its origin. And finally, integration, bringing the cleaned money back into the legitimate economy, maybe through buying property or setting up businesses.
It sounds complex, but the goal is simple. Make dirty money look clean. What's the wider impact, though, beyond the financial crime itself?
The Supreme Court itself has said it affects not just the financial system, but the sovereignty and integrity of the nation. The FATF, the international watchdog, also flags its impact on monetary stability and trade. It's seen as a threat that enables other crimes.
And the PMLA itself is quite a tough law, isn't it?
It is, remarkably so. The article points out that the burden of proof is on the accused to show their assets are legitimate. That reverses the usual principle.
Innocent until proven guilty doesn't quite apply here.
Not in the same way regarding the source of funds. And the ED can start proceedings based on an internal document, an ECR, without needing a police FIR first, as long as there's an underlying scheduled offense.
So a stringent law, but rampant offense and very few convictions. What explains that?
Well, the article points to the irony, but it also raises a really critical issue, potential misuse of the law. It states that on many occasions, the law has been abused by authority, something even the Supreme Court has noted.
How has it been misused?
It cites a 2022 Supreme Court judgment, Vijay Madanlal Chaudhuri. The court confirmed that while a scheduled crime is needed for prosecution, the ED could attach property before a criminal case for that crime is even registered. The article suggests this power has been very often misused by authorities with politically motivated intentions.
That's a serious allegation, using an anti-laundering law for political ends.
It's a concern raised in the article, so what's the way forward? The piece recommends strictly following FATF guidelines to ensure cases are handled with care and caution to prevent misuse.
And improving the conviction rate.
Yes, by properly investigating and reporting genuine cases. And it stresses the crucial link between money laundering and terrorism. It's often a major source of terror financing.
So international cooperation is key, like those tax agreements.
The double taxation avoidance agreements India has with about 85 countries help with information exchange, yes. But the article's overall take is that much needs to be done. Things aren't quite in the right direction yet. The core insight: India's anti-money laundering fight needs better enforcement, more convictions, and crucial safeguards against misuse to be truly effective.
Okay, still in the text section, let's look at another aspect of international relations, but this time focusing on China's overseas policing activities. This article starts with a specific event. In July, China sent an 8-member police team to Croatia for a joint patrol. Apparently, this is the 6th time they've done this under a 2017 agreement. What are these patrols supposedly for?
Well, the official line from China's Ministry of Public Security, the MPS, is about safety concerns for Chinese tourists in Croatia. And tourism numbers are up significantly, 250,000 Chinese visitors in 2024, a 41% increase.
Okay, so helping tourists. But the article suggests there's more to it.
Absolutely. It places these patrols within the context of China's broader security initiatives, like Operation Fox Hunt, started in 2014, and then Skynet from 2015. These are aimed at building policing and surveillance networks far beyond China's borders.
So these patrols aren't just isolated incidents in Croatia.
No. The article mentions similar joint patrols have happened with Serbia and Italy, though Italy suspended theirs due to concerns. And in Hungary, one Chinese county's police bureau has even set up police service centers.
Actual service centers
Yeah.
abroad.
Yes. And the article argues this freedom for Chinese police abroad raises two main concerns. One, the potential for them to target and even arrest Chinese dissidents living overseas.
And the second,
That these operations can lead to basically setting up undeclared police stations around the world.
like those ones discovered in the Netherlands.
Exactly. In 2023, they found 2 service stations in Amsterdam and Rotterdam. China claimed they were just helping expats with things like driver's license renewals.
But investigations suggested otherwise.
A media investigation found evidence suggesting they were used by covert operatives to target dissidents. They cited a case of a Chinese-Dutch citizen being contacted after he questioned Beijing's narrative about the 2020 Galwan Valley clashes with India.
So using these centers for intimidation or surveillance, has this happened elsewhere?
Yes, the article mentions the FBI arresting 2 operatives in April 2023 at a similar service center in Manhattan's Chinatown. They were linked to the MPS and charged with acting as illegal agents of the PRC and obstruction of justice.
So some countries are cracking down. How are different nations responding overall?
It seems to depend heavily on their relationship with China. The U.S. is taking public action partly due to long-standing espionage concerns.
But countries friendlier with China.
In places like Mongolia, Serbia, Croatia, where these joint patrols are happening, there haven't been public investigations so far. The article suggests these nations prioritize their economic and security ties with China.
So the issue of transnational repression might get overlooked.
It seems likely to, as the article puts it, take a backseat unless the degree of surveillance rises to the level that it harms national and/or European security. It's a geopolitical calculation for many. The key insight. China's overseas policing is a growing network, potentially for repression, and the global response is fragmented based on national interests.
A complex issue with significant implications for sovereignty and human rights. Let's turn to our final article for today, also from the text section. This one introduces a powerful, if disturbing, concept, necropolitics. The article starts with a stark question. Why does an attack in Mumbai cause national outrage, while a similar attack in Kashmir often feels normalized, less shocking? It suggests this relates to necropolitics. What exactly is that?
Necropolitics is a term coined by the historian Achille Mbembe. It builds on Foucault's idea of biopolitics, how states manage life. But necropolitics focuses on the flip side, the power to determine who can be allowed to die.
The power to let die.
Essentially, yes. It examines how states decide who is disposable, who may be sacrificed, whose suffering is basically ignored by the system, often in the name of security or political control. And it's not just passive neglect. The article argues it can involve actively producing suffering with calculated precision.
Can you give some historical examples the article uses?
It mentions the 1943 Bengal famine. Millions died, not because there wasn't enough food overall, but because British colonial policies put imperial interests first, making those deaths systemic, not just accidental.
A chilling example of prioritizing some lives over others.
And it also brings up the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s, how certain groups, particularly queer people of color, were effectively abandoned by healthcare systems, while other lives, maybe those seen as more respectable, were grieved. It connects to Jasbir Parra's idea of queer necropolitics.
So what are the hallmarks of necropolitics in action?
The article lists several defining features. State terror used to crush dissent. States collaborating with militias. Enmity becoming a core principle of governance, where the right to kill becomes a sign of authority.
And war itself.
War and terror can become self-sustaining economies, fueling arms markets and surveillance. Also, active predation displacing communities for resources, for example, and death administered in various forms, not just killing, but torture, drone strikes, starvation, disappearance, all often justified by ideologies like nationalism or religion.
The article also mentions the state of exception.
Yes, that's when the law effectively suspends itself, allowing for actions that would normally be illegal. Mbembe adds this concept of the living dead.
The living dead, what does that mean?
People who aren't killed outright but are forced into conditions so degraded, so violent and unstable that their life becomes a kind of slow, continuous dying.
Does the article give a more recent Indian example?
It points to the COVID-19 lockdown. The migrant workers forced to walk hundreds of miles, many dying on the roads not from the virus itself, but from sheer exhaustion, hunger, from state neglect. And their deaths, the article argues, were largely unmourned, a form of necropolitical abandonment, and a very current global example.
Gaza is presented as a stark case, a death world. After the Hamas attack, the article describes Israeli strikes flattening hospitals, homes, aid centers, and how even the deaths of children were sometimes dismissed as collateral damage. The relative silence that followed, it argues, shows necropolitics very clearly.
So the key takeaway isn't just about war zones.
No, definitely not. The article stresses that necropolitics exists in silence, too. It thrives in the slow violence of poverty, caste discrimination, racism, displacement. Anywhere certain lives are deemed less valuable, less grievable. Resistance, therefore, has to be about demanding that all lives are recognized, valued, and mourned equally. A deeply challenging concept to end on. It forces you to think about whose lives matter and why. Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. Apologies if you couldn't reach out earlier. The message inbox was restricted. You should be able to now. As always, we are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.